Hey guys, my name is Haley and I have my December wrap-up for you today. The reason I haven't been posting the last week or so is number one, I got really sick and lost my voice and it's just now starting to come back. And the last week of the year was just super hectic and I didn't have time to film because everybody was home and I don't like filming when people are home. So I know it's the new year already, but I would like to film my wrap-up for you so you can know what I read in the last couple weeks of the year, so let's get started. This is also going to include my Cramathon wrap-up as well, which I did the week before Christmas. So the first book that I finished in the month of December was Forgotten God by Francis Chan. I've read Francis Chan's other book, Crazy Love, and really enjoyed it. I think I gave this one 4 stars because it wasn't quite as good as Crazy Love for me. I also took a really long time to read it. He basically talks about the importance of the Holy Spirit. I really enjoyed it. This was a book that we did a series on in my church a couple years ago, so I was very happy to have finally read it, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I finished Fire and Ash by Jonathan Mayberry. This is the 4th book in the Rotten Ruin series, and I did not like it. I gave it 2 stars. I didn't really like how the whole zombie virus thing was wrapped up and how it came to be. I didn't like the kind of convenient conclusion of the story. I really hated that a lot of this book focused on the relationship between Benny and Nix, who, if you've seen any of my videos, you know I don't like them. Essentially, I just really didn't like it, and I'm actually quite excited to get rid of these. Although I'm really sad because I really love the spines and the covers, but I did not enjoy it, and I'm not gonna keep them on my shelves. Then I read Death Note Volume 4. I just sort of binge read this whole book right before Cramathon started because I wanted to get to the other 2 volumes during the readathon. And I really enjoyed this. I've been giving these 5 out of 5 stars since the beginning of the series. I'm so happy that this is my first manga because things get crazy in here and I'm actually kind of excited to watch the TV show. I know there's an anime of it and I generally don't like anime, but I really enjoy the storylines of these, so I'm very excited to watch that. And then Cramathon started, and I was actually awake at the midnight when the readathon started, which I'm usually not. So I took advantage of that and started Ho Ho Ho, which is a collection of holiday stories because Christmas was in a week and I hadn't read this yet and I knew I needed to. This was cute. There were a couple of them that were really funny. There was one where kids rewrite Christmas lyrics and a lot of them were hilarious. I was actually cracking up and it was like midnight and I needed to go to sleep, but they were really funny. Gave it 3 stars. I'm probably gonna get rid of it because I wouldn't reread it. It's not my favorite, but it was a cute little collection of stories to get me in the Christmas mood. And then because I had started this, I decided to do the read 2 books in 24 hours challenge for Cramathon, so I've read the Pendragon graphic novel. This was also just okay. I didn't really like the art style. It oversimplified the storyline, and I'm very familiar with the storyline of Pendragon. As you know, it's one of my favorite series, so I'm probably gonna keep it just because I like to collect things related to Pendragon, but I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't great. I would not recommend this over the book unless you're like a die-hard Pendragon fan and you just want to see the story in a different medium from the first book. Then for the challenge of read a book with pictures in it, I read The Wicked Grimoire. This was so much fun to read. There was a section in here that was about how the actors came up with the idea behind their character and how they portrayed them from the original Broadway and the touring cast. This has a ton of pictures in it, but there was these really pretty cast photos of each of the main characters, and this one of Idina Menzel's alphabet was stunning and I loved it so much. The dragon and the map of the stage, and I was just so happy to read this. I wish this type of thing existed for every musical ever. Have the story behind how the cast members came up with the thought process and the history of their characters, especially for new Broadway plays like this. But it was phenomenal. I loved it so much. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. The next challenge was to read a book that you've been meaning to read for a while, and for that one I read Broken Crowns by Lauren DeStefano. This is the 3rd book in the Internment Chronicles, which I really loved the first book, and then I read the second book earlier this year, and I really think I just wasn't in the mood for it because I gave it like 2 or 3 stars. And in my review, I said I was like super annoyed with the characters and that kind of thing. And I think I don't know what was wrong with me because I really liked this conclusion to the series, and I really like the world that Lauren DeStefano created of Internment, which is a magical floating island above what we know as the Earth. Our main character, Morgan, is from there. Her and her friends end up down on the Earth, and they get involved in a whole bunch of political issues between the two worlds, and it was just really interesting, and I gave this 4 stars, I believe. But I do plan to keep the trilogy because I really love Lauren DeStefano's writing style. If you hear my voice going in and out, this is like the most I've talked in like a week, so we're just gonna have to deal with that. Next, I combined 2 of the challenges because I ended up not reading one of the books that I was planning on reading. So I read volume 5 of Death Note, and I used this for the challenge of read a graphic novel or manga and read a book that's set in a different country than where you're from. Because a lot of these books take place in Japan, so that's kind of cheating because it's a Japanese manga, but I don't live in Japan, so I really enjoyed it. I'd give these 5 out of 5 stars every time. There was a really surprising death in this one, which I wasn't expecting, and there was a big time jump as well, but I really enjoyed it. I love this series, and I did not get to the last bind up of the Black editions in December, but I do plan to read it in January. Next was to read a book under 200 pages, and for that I read The Giver. I loved this. This was a reread for me, but I hadn't read it since like middle school when I was like 12, so I really didn't remember anything about it. Sameness has become sort of the everyday for people, so that everyone is the same. You have a certain limit to how many kids you can have and how many people can be in a household, and your parents aren't your real parents, and it's just a really fascinating world. I do much prefer this to the movie because I did see the movie when it first came out, and when I saw it I was very confused because I felt like I didn't remember half of that stuff happening, and I'm pretty sure the main difference was there was a huge romance in the movie, and there's not really in this one, so I don't know why they did that. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I think I might actually continue with the series eventually. And then the last challenge for Cramathon was to read 7 books, and I just picked 2 other random books since I had combined some of the challenges. So I read Heartless by Marissa Meyer, which I loved and I talked about a lot in my favorites of 2016, so if you want to hear me talk more about it there, go check that video out. But I loved this book. It's a villain origin story of the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, and it was amazing. I loved it so much more than I was expecting to, and it has one of my favorite love interests probably ever, because I love Jest, and I loved the Mad Hatter in this. I'm very particular about Mad Hatters in like Alice in Wonderland retellings because he is my favorite character from that story. Props to Marissa Meyer for doing a great retelling of Wonderland and doing a great job of making it her own as well. And then lastly, to complete the 7-book challenge, I read Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, I believe is how you pronounce her name. I want to preface this by saying I don't like poetry. I didn't expect to like this going into it, and I was very right. I don't like poetry. I thought some of them were relatable, but a lot of it's just like a couple words with random line breaks, and I just didn't find it that effective. I know that's a very unpopular opinion because a lot of people just adore this book, but I was not one of them. I didn't expect to going into it, and some of them were relatable, I guess, for just being a woman. I gave this 2 stars. This is actually not my copy, it was my sister's. She gave it to me to read because it's one of her favorite books, and she doesn't read a lot, so I was like, okay, I'll read it. And I'm sorry, I didn't like it. And then I finished 3 of the books, 2 of which I got for Christmas that I knew I could read really fast. The first being Quidditch Through the Ages. I read this in like a good 20 minutes. It was actually really, really interesting. I'm not sure that I ever read this one, but I really enjoyed it. I actually really loved learning so much about Quidditch and like the international teams that we don't really know a whole lot about in the series, and I loved it. I'm not sure that I could give anything less than 5 stars to anything from Harry Potter, so And then I just sat and read Dan and Phil Go Outside. This is their account of when they were on tour. And it has a lot of super, oh my gosh, incredibly pretty photos that they took while they were on tour. Like, look at that. The full page ones are so pretty and all of them are just stunning. Me and my friends, Megan and Emily, actually did meet them when they were on tour when they came to a city near us, and it was so nice to meet them. They were so nice. They're so tall and I'm like a relatively short person, so that was actually the only thing I think I like physically said to them, because I've been watching Dan and Phil for, I want to say, somewhere around 8 years. Although I've been watching Dan for that long. I didn't start watching Phil until a couple years ago when they started their gaming channel, but I loved this. It was a really interesting look into their life while they were on tour, and I would highly recommend it if you're a fan of Dan and Phil at all or any of their channels. And then the last thing that I finished, technically, we'll get to that in a minute, but I read Tales of Beetle the Bard. I have read this before. This was a reread for me, but after reading Quidditch Through the Ages, I just really wanted to reread it, and I loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I love the stories in here. They're like child fairy tales from the Wizarding World with like commentary by Dumbledore after each story. And Dumbledore's snark was just hilarious. Just Harry Potter. You can't go wrong with anything Harry Potter, and that's how I decided to end the year. And then here was my dilemma. This is a bind-up of Obsidian and Onyx, which are the first 2 books in the Lux series, and I did read Obsidian in like the last couple days of the year, and I read it in like literally 2 sittings over the course of a day when I first started to get sick. And I didn't finish the bind-up, so it didn't count towards my Goodreads goal, but I did technically read Obsidian and finish Obsidian. So I did technically read that, so I figured I would include it in this wrap-up. And I am quite frankly loving this series because it's literally Twilight with aliens, and I've been kind of wanting to reread Twilight, so this did it for me. I am about halfway through the series right now. I have the last book coming in the mail, and I'm just enjoying it so much. Those are all of the books that I finished in the month of December. Thank you all for I'm gonna drop them. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.